Brought to you by Moonbeam Multimedia.
This is 16 to 1, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning. Hi there.
Hello there.
Hello.
How are you?
Doing well. Feeling rested, finally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Doing that thing.
Spent some time in the pool yesterday doing nothing but relaxing and reading.
Yeah.
I'm almost, can you believe it? I'm almost done with my book, the Bell Labs book.
I will do anything for you to be done with that book.
I don't want it to end.
I
keep
can
picking
tell.
I
You
keep
read
picking
like
up-
a page a week.
I know, but I keep picking up other books in the meantime. But yeah, I'm almost done with it, and it's really good.
I don't think people realize that a lot of summer is spent doing everything we don't have time to do during the regular year.
True.
Like, this is when all of my doctor's appointments happen.
And house maintenance.
Yeah, we're fixing the fence. It's just like, I don't think people realize that a good portion of a teacher's summer is spent doing all the things they need to live.
Well, it's because you're pretty occupied during American business hours during the school year.
Yeah,
So
I
you
don't
can't
have a
just,
job that like
pop over to
Yeah. I feel like I've had a doctor's appointment a week, and that's just what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
Okay, ready to jump in?
You want to take us on our education news headline roundup? Would you like to go first this week?
Yeah, here
Okay,
we go.
go for it.
Number one, as expected, student loans are back in our headlines.
They are. It's true.
So, following the Supreme Court's decision to strike down Biden's debt relief plan that would have leveraged the HEROES Act, which was to provide debt relief for up to 40 million borrowers, the president's administration announced a round of automatic loan repayments due to 800,000 plus loan holders under fixes to the 1965 Higher Education Act, which basically stipulates that a borrower is eligible for loan forgiveness after making 240 or 300 qualifying monthly payments. Basically, you've been paying on that loan for 20 to 25 years on an income-driven repayment plan, depending on what your plan type was. So the administration released a statement, and this is their quote: "The forthcoming discharges are a result of fixes implemented by the Biden-Harris administration to ensure all borrowers have an accurate count of the number of monthly payments that qualify towards forgiveness under income-driven repayments, IDR plans." End quote.
Yeah.
This applies to people who have been paying for their loans
Yeah.
for roughly 20 years.
Yeah,
So people who are probably a little more secure in their jobs than, someone in their 20s.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure this is welcome relief for this slice
Yeah,
of people.
sure.
But I'm a little underwhelmed by this and the timing of this. This kind of feels like a tiny little slice of consolation pie compared to what was on the table before.
Not quite enough to fill you up.
Right.
Just a little taste. It's a bite.
This SCOTUS ruling happening, and then this, and we go from 40 million affected borrowers to just under a million. So I feel like this is the Biden administration clawing at whatever positive news they can try to get at with regard to student loans. This was a big promise of this administration. They've been obviously unable to get student debt relief, any traction on that in Congress. And obviously, they also failed to get traction on it with regard to leveraging the HEROES Act. And we did talk about that a lot.
Times are tough.
This sort of seems to me like it's already supposed to work this way. And they're just, the timing of it are taking credit for it.
Oh.
So
I don't like that.
I don't know. I don't know exactly. I didn't dig deep into what the fixes supposedly are to the Higher Education Act. But this sounds like basically just holding the companies accountable for what they're already supposed to be doing and maybe just haven't done as a result of clerical errors or something, or just ignoring the problem. Okay. Headline number 2, move over Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. There's a new fraudster on trial.
Oh, she'll be devastated.
Her name is Charlie Javis. I think that's how you say it. She's the founder of Frank, which I'd never heard of before, but was apparently a student aid assistance company that was acquired by JP Morgan Chase in 2021 for the hefty sum of $175 million.
Holy cow.
Okay, so Javis is on trial for fraud, wire fraud, and bank fraud. This really does sound similar to Theranos.
Yeah, except for no blood.
The government alleges that Javis lied about Frank's client base in order to inflate the company's value and secure the acquisition deal. If convicted, Javis faces up to 20 years in prison. She allegedly lied about Frank's number of active users, revenue, and partnerships with universities. I was reading about this, and I think she tried to have somebody at her company essentially create a bunch of fake client records before they were acquired, because JP Morgan was like, hey, we need to see your paperwork here. And the person at her company, I think in the article I was reading, refused to do it. So she went to some other data scientist and was like, can you invent a whole bunch of customers? Basically.
Oh my goodness.
I'm not sure how, and I have the same feeling about Elizabeth Holmes. I don't know how these people think they're going to get away with this. Like, do they just think that companies don't do due diligence in a $175 million deal? They're not going to do due diligence.
Well, and like about Elizabeth Holmes, like Theranos got what, Rite Aid or CVS involved? Like, I think
she fooled everyone.
No, I know. Like her whole, I'm just saying.
But even that eventually still fell apart because somebody along the line did due diligence and was like, oh, you don't actually have the product that you say you do.
I'm just...
Anyway, trial is currently underway. Federal court in Manhattan. Expected to last several weeks. And like I said, I'd never heard of this company called Frank. But as you can see, the student loan industry is fraught with complications, much like this one.
It does sound like Elizabeth Holmes might have a new soulmate, though.
Yep. Sounds like we
Charlie, meet Elizabeth.
Good luck. Good luck.
Last one.
Yes.
Last week, Harvard University announced initial guidelines for the use of generative artificial intelligence programs such as ChatGPT, Midjourney, DALL-E, and others in an email to university staff, students, and partners. According to the Crimson, the email, quote, emphasized the protection of confidential data, reiterated academic integrity policies, and warned against AI phishing attempts. That's the end of the quote. The university said that it supported responsible experimentation with AI tools.
Yeah. So they wanted to put some parameters around this. And this is kind of what you and I have been talking about. Like, it's really not acceptable to just ignore these technologies and pretend like they don't exist. We need to teach people how to use them responsibly. I think there's going to be a great need for increased tech literacy very, very soon. I think that teachers and students alike are going to have to become way more familiar with these things quickly than the average layperson, non-technical layperson is. Because we need to start to understand. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
As someone who was forced to sit through professional development at the end of the year about artificial intelligence.
Yikes.
And I know that I certainly knew more about it than the person giving the PD.
Yeah, you were telling me information about this professional development, and I was climbing up the walls. It was making me nuts because the person that they had come to talk to you about it clearly did not understand it. They were not a technical...
They were not.
They were acting like they had technical understanding of ChatGPT, but they said, for example, stuff like you can't plagiarize if it comes from ChatGPT.
It's not plagiarism.
You absolutely 100% can because ChatGPT comes up with stuff from sources all over the internet and doesn't cite its sources in a lot of cases, or if it does,
or it's made up.
Yeah, or the sources are made up, or if it does cite sources, it doesn't do it very prominently. And anyway, there are a whole bunch of ethical issues with regard to these things that this person providing professional development to you did not seem to quite grasp. And that was really concerning to me. And I think that schools are going to need to start paying more attention to this stuff quickly.
Luckily, in that room, I was in there and a few of my other coworkers who were well aware of artificial intelligence and kind of its use in this way.
Yeah, like your technology teacher.
And so we pushed back on her a lot.
I'm so glad you did.
And I flat out said, like, one of the things she told us to do was to put a student's essay into ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to provide feedback. And I just looked at the whole staff and I was like, if you think our administration is going to support that, like, you're wrong. And there's no way that's going to be suitable to report to a student or to a parent or to an administrator.
Yeah,
that's how you graded their essay.
That was the other facet of the presentation that I found was interesting, was that she was encouraging you all to do things that your school has made a conscious effort to discourage you from doing.
Yeah.
And for reasons, not just because of a sort of fear of the technology or not understanding it, but like you've made a concerted effort to think about these things and you've come up with some policies and approaches. And this person presenting was just like, it's cool, just do it for everything. Like, look how nifty it is. And it's like, ay, ay, ay. It's like the person offering the PD listened to all of the tech bro Elon Musky headlines about this kind of technology and just became dazzled by it and didn't follow through on some of the ethical or technological implications.
It was really rough.
Well, I'm glad that you felt empowered to point out some of these problems.
Did not have much fun with that.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Okay, so Harvard leading the way there. I would like to dig into what exactly those guidelines were. I'm sure they were pretty interesting, but it was in an email and I couldn't find the original text of the email, but the Crimson was reporting on it there, and we'll put that link in the show notes.
Mm-hmm. This guy's been on our list from the start.
Oh, we've been threatening to do an episode on John Dewey since the very beginning of the podcast.
I fear we'll have no more John Dewey jokes.
It's funny because I gave myself we've been doing this for years now, and I've gotten even more distance from John Dewey. And I will just say at the top of this that John Dewey was a big part of my graduate education because I went to Teachers College, Columbia University. And he's very tied up in Columbia.
He's their bread and butter, yeah. We're going to talk about John Dewey.
We sure are.
And what Dewey did and what Dewey didn't. You're welcome. I've been workshopping that one for a moment.
You really planned that, didn't you?
And I'm done.
Okay.
So here's a quote from John Dewey to start with. It says, "I believe that education is the fundamental method of social progress and reform."
Yeah, I agree with him.
Okay.
This is what I was telling you when we were preparing for this. I was like, yeah, I kind of forgot how much I actually do believe some of these things that he said.
Come on, there's going to be so many good ones.
I don't think there are.
Lean in.
I think we're going to lean out.
Okay. So Dewey lived from the Civil War to the Cold War. He wrote 37 books. He published 766 articles in 151 journals. In his lifetime, he was hailed as America's preeminent philosopher. And in China, people called him the second Confucius.
I did not know that part.
He was born October 20th, 1859, and he died June 1st, 1952. To highlight what Dewey believed in his brand of educational philosophy, you're going to hear the word pragmatism. And basically, he saw the purpose of education as the cultivation of thoughtful, critically reflective, and socially engaged individuals, rather than passive recipients of established knowledge. So far, what I've learned about Dewey is that it was a lot of do as I say, not as I do.
Wait, what do you mean by that?
Because everyone that I read about said that, and like what you talked about too, is just like, he was very like sage on a stage, but was very get your hands in there and like do the thing, but Dewey did not do what... Yeah. Do as I say, not as I do. You know what I mean?
Let me just pause for just a moment to set the stage a little bit. So John Dewey is a very big name in American education. If you go to school to learn how to be a teacher in America, you are probably going to learn some things about John Dewey and his philosophy.
Whether you want to or not.
Yes.
You are going to be forced.
It's very big. He sort of is the founder of a certain school of psychology. He's like a psychologist and an educational reformer. Yes, he's very tied up in pragmatism and progressivism. And like you're saying, he had a lot of ideas that he did not particularly adhere to himself as a classroom teacher. The one story, I had it farther down, but I'll just say it.
Yeah, sorry. I just felt like it was worth mentioning because I feel like the whole time we're talking about somebody who didn't actually do the things that he was like, preaching to do, which is odd.
It's kind of funny because like he was influenced by Rousseau, and Rousseau was also historically really bad at. Rousseau had a lot of things to say about parenting and education and upbringing, and he was historically quite bad at parenting himself. He would just like abandon kids at orphanages and stuff, and just like
that's historically bad. Yeah, that's bad. Yeah,
but he wrote a book called Emile, which is both about education and parenting, kind of, but it's about this idea of sort of letting children in a self-directed way be driven by their curiosities as they are growing and learning and whatever. So much like Rousseau was historically bad at being a parent, John Dewey was anecdotally bad at being a classroom educator. He not only discovered that he probably didn't have what it takes to be a primary school educator, but he also was, according to the stories that I heard while at Columbia, he was a very bad lecturer. Like he would stand at the front of a classroom in the middle of stage and just like stare out a window and deliver remarks to his students, and they'd be like, "Are you talking to us, or like
is this for us?"
He would just be staring out,
or are you working out something on your own?
A window at the side of the room and just not looking at students. So anyway, he's definitely not straightforward. He's a little bit controversial sometimes, but he definitely has an outsized presence in American educational circles and more modern education reform movements. So anyway, that's just setting the stage.
Are you ready to go way back with me?
I'm ready to go way back.
Okay. Dewey was raised in Burlington, Vermont. His mom was a pretty religious woman, and his dad was a well-read grocer. He was one of 4 boys, and he was actually the second Dewey's son, named John, after the first one was killed in an accident. And the John Dewey that we know was born 40 weeks later, and they named him John.
That's weird to me.
So they lost one John and got a replacement John.
I think it would be way too much pressure to be the replacement John. Like, what? You're like, oh, I'm the second try of this name.
He's the second attempt.
Like, what if it's a family name, too, and you feel like you have a lot of...
Well, I'm assuming it is, because there had to be more than just John as an option back then. Anyways.
Okay.
No pressure, but you're the second John. So, Dewey attended the University of Vermont. In post-graduation, he spent 3 years teaching high school. 2 years he spent in Oil City, Pennsylvania, where he taught Latin and algebra, and by all accounts was average at best. And then 1 year in Charlotte, Vermont, and that's when he realized he might be better suited for older students, which is roughly translated to, I'm bad at this, so I'm going to go do something else.
Yeah.
So he leaves the classroom.
I mean, at least he was self-aware. At least he knew that he was not good at this.
We love a self-aware, yes.
But it's interesting that the guy who wrote the book on... Anyway, okay.
Okay. So from there, after realizing that the classroom is not for him in that way.
Right. At least not with young kids.
Yes.
Yeah. He thinks that's the problem.
He does. He thinks that, he thinks the older kids will be better, but it sounds as if that was not the case either. He decides to go back to school, and he is going to go to Johns Hopkins University, where he will eventually receive his PhD from the School of Arts and Sciences. So, jumping ahead, 1884, he accepts a faculty position at the University of Michigan, and he's there off and on until 1894. While he's at the University of Michigan, he marries one of his students. Her name is Alice, and they start a family together. And it's actually their children that sort of help inspire him to devote much of what will become his future work in education, using his background in psychology, because he was hoping to correct some of the issues and the flaws that he had experienced and what he knew school to be like.
Okay.
But having
it sounds
kids
like
of
he
his
has
own,
a lot to say about the educational system, both as a
I
product
think he
of
had
it
an
and
axe
as
to
a
grind, yeah,
right.
I
It sounds. I mean, let me just tell you, as somebody with an axe to grind with the education system, it can be a great motivator for wanting to become involved in its future. So I get it.
Yeah. So Dewey, like I said, he marries one of his students. They have some children together, and that's kind of where he decides his work will go. So that was at the University of Michigan. So now in 1894, he moves to the University of Chicago, and he's there for the next 10 years. And so here's a quote that I found from the National Endowment for the Humanities article that I was reading, and I'll include the link in the show notes. It says, before he published his groundbreaking essay, Dewey had to test his half-formed ideas in a real school. Thus, he and his wife ran the lab school at the University of Chicago from 1894 to 1905. Classes were small and select. Dewey drew on the expertise of Chicago's professors to create age-appropriate curriculums, stressing discovery and cooperation and the talents of creative teachers to implement it. The Dewey School was distinctly middle class with motivated students and supportive parents. So that's kind of what he set up to do at the University of Chicago. Chelsea and I were talking about Dewey last night. I'm getting some hints of Maria Montessori vibes from Dewey at times.
Yeah, I would say that they have some overlap in their approach. The sort of self-directed learning business, yeah.
And so here's kind of where that comes from, though. So in 1899, he published the pamphlet that would make him famous, The School and Society. And in it, he basically insisted that the old model of schooling, where students sat in rows, they memorized and recited things, was antiquated. He believed that students should be active, not passive, and that they required compelling and relevant projects, not lectures. Ironic. Students should become problem solvers and use interest, not fear, to motivate them. And they should cooperate and not compete.
I think I've told this story before, but while at Columbia and learning about all of this stuff, and Dewey specifically, and going over how he was like, yes, we shouldn't be sitting in rows and memorizing and reciting and listening to lectures because it's such passive learning. I was sitting in a row listening to a lecture
about passive learning.
And they tried to like do this mixed approach or whatever. They were always sort of doing this meta-analysis of how they were doing the education in their own education school, right? So like being a student at Teachers College is half of it is just about thinking about how you're in class that day. But anyway, I did always find it.
That would not do the thing.
Well, because you're always talking about teaching. So it's just like you're always talking about what is happening to you in addition to the process that you're going to share with your own students down the line. So yeah, but I always did find it a bit confusing and off-putting to hear about how bad lectures were for learning in lecture form. Anyway.
So I like what Dewey was doing, if you will. I like the idea of cooperation. I think all of that is really good.
Sure.
And so here's another quote from the National Endowment of the Humanities, kind of about the historical backdrop at the time. So the quote says, America in 1900 was preoccupied with the clash between capital and labor, debating how to make the worker more than an appendage to the machine.
Well, that's not familiar at all.
To science, geography, and physics, Dewey added another advantage, meaning while the typical student did not go on to high school or attend college, manual training conducted by a skilled teacher could stimulate the imagination, enlarge the sympathies, and acquaint young people with scientific intelligence. Dewey was outraged that thousands of young ones are practically ruined in the Chicago schools every year. That was his quote. His new education sought to encourage students to continue in school and combat the increase in juvenile delinquency and look to produce an inquiring student who could change America.
Yeah.
That's all well and good because he's definitely pushing against what's happening at the time.
Right. What I appreciate in Dewey's approach to education is that we're not teaching it as job training. Not that education should prepare you for work, but that's not the only thing that it is there to do. It is there to prepare you to be a human being and live a human life. And insofar as we reduce the purpose of education to that of preparing for a job, we're not equipping people to be people. We're equipping people to be job holders. And that is not, I don't personally think that that is the sole purpose of education. So Dewey is obviously very concerned about these things as well. He has some sort of strange approaches, but I at least can sympathize with that.
Like I said, Dewey was at the University of Chicago for just about 10 years. Until he left because of a long-standing beef between him and the president of the University of Chicago at the time, a guy named William Rainey Harper. There seems to be some bad blood about his wife not getting a leadership position at a school when they were starting with another organization. And William Rainey Harper is an Ohio boy. He has ties to the Ohio State University, and he's a New Concord native.
I couldn't find exact details here, but it sounds like his wife got slighted by somebody at U Chicago, and he was just like, I'm out of here.
Yeah, it seems like they just really had it out for each other.
Yeah, it sounds like there was not a good relationship there.
Yeah, and a little bit later I'm going to talk about some of the odd things about Dewey, because we've only just scratched the surface. So I can imagine if you're the president of the University of Chicago, while John Dewey might be very exciting to have, you might always have to be covering for something that's about to happen.
He's a little bit odd. It's okay.
Dewey leaves the University of Chicago and heads to Columbia, which is where he's probably most well known for his work. And he retired from there in 1930.
Yes. And then in the meantime, he also did a whole bunch of other stuff. He became president of the American Philosophical Association in 1905, longtime member of the American Federation of Teachers, along with historians Charles Beard and James Harvey Robinson, and the economist Thorstein Veblen. Dewey is one of the founders of the New School. That was founded in 1919 by this group of progressive intellectuals. They were looking for a new, more relevant model of education. It was originally known as the New School for Social Research, and it's grown to become a leading university with 5 colleges and schools. It continues to be a beacon of progressive thought and intellectual inquiry to this day. And then his most famous works include The School and Society, Democracy in Education, Experience in Education, and Art as Experience. These works have been translated into many languages, have been read by scholars and educators around the world.
Did you go to Columbia because of Dewey? Was that on your radar?
Not at all.
Okay. Can I tell you just some things that I learned about John Dewey.
Yeah. These
That
are
didn't
things-
really fit something else, but I thought, you know what? People should know this.
Well, these are the things that I wish I had known in graduate school because it would have made the whole study of him more, at least entertaining and engaging. But he's kind of a weird guy.
Yeah. Okay. So Dewey historically loved democracy.
He's very big on democracy, yes.
Also was a self-proclaimed, quote, something of an anarchist.
Yeah. He talked about democracy this way. He said, quote, democracy and the one ultimate ethical ideal of humanity are to my mind synonymous. End quote.
So
he's very obsessed with democracy, but also occasionally something of an anarchist.
Yeah.
Whatever that means. I get it.
President Eisenhower once said that all of the failings of the U.S. education system were because of John Dewey.
Wow.
That's tough.
I wonder why Eisenhower specifically had such an axe to grind with him. I'm going to have to read about that.
Yeah. Like I said earlier, his mother was a really devoted Christian. And as he got older, it seemed, I don't know if stray is the right word, but there was distance between kind of how he was raised and his Christian beliefs. But then he would also like sprinkle in Christian beliefs into some of his writings. Mm-hmm. So I would file that under the same place as the maybe anarchist, maybe loves democracy.
Yeah, well, I think he appreciated some of the moral teachings of Christianity.
Yeah.
And anyway, yeah.
He believed that urban children needed to sew, cook, and work with metal and wood, which I like, hands-on.
Okay, so he's saying that these city kids are soft. They need to know how to patch their clothes.
He did not say directly soft, but I think he thought that they could be more useful.
Useful. Yeah, see, this is funny to me is because he wants everybody to be able to do these like basic function of life things, but he also doesn't want us to become cogs in the capitalistic machine. Right. So he's like, also make sure you can use a handsaw. I don't know. Okay.
He was really well liked as a person. Well, maybe other than William Rainey Harper. He did not boast about himself. He did not talk about himself, and he never wrote anything about himself. There are no memoirs or autobiographies. And I read a lot of information about Dewey these last few days, but I feel like every time somebody talked about meeting Dewey, they were like surprised by how much they liked Dewey. Does that make sense?
Well, it does make sense because when you read his stuff, it's like dry as much like it would probably be boring to sit and listen to him lecture. There are great ideas in it, but it is not overly engaging, and it wouldn't give you the impression that this guy is fun to hang out with at a party.
I guess he was like a great time.
Okay.
Everyone was like a big fan of him.
I love me that John Dewey. He's such a hoot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Weirdly. As we mentioned, he was basically notoriously a sage on the stage in the classroom.
Yes.
And one of the articles I read had one of his former students talking about he would just sit at a table with like one sheet of paper, and he would keep coming back to something he had said, rephrasing or restating, and they said they couldn't figure out if he was trying to make us understand it or if he was trying to make sure he understood it as he was saying it.
It makes sense why somebody like this would have been disappointed by the traditional education system too.
And according to his students, it was either really successful or truly awful and distracting.
Okay.
Yeah, and his wife walked around their house naked a lot.
He and his wife walked around naked?
Yep, just in their house. That was just like part of their lives.
Okay.
And this next part will probably not surprise you. He was reclusive at times. He had severe bouts of depression. They lost 2 of their sons before the age of 10. And he was always deep into reading a book. And at times, he would have to actually quit reading for extended amount of time to make sure that like his work was done.
Yeah, I heard that he quit reading because of eye strain.
He had really bad eye strain, but also like he would become so engrossed in a book that he literally would not do anything else. And so he had.
I also understand that impulse.
Yeah, but one of the articles I read said that he would have to quit reading for 6 months just so he could get a paper done because he could not multitask. He could not stop reading long enough to do something. But then he was this really well liked person.
Sure. This is not that surprising to me. This is just a dude who hyper focuses.
I'm interested.
Yeah.
Because every time I read about him, it was like people being shocked that they liked him as much as they did. And I was like, I get it, because nothing about him like translates on paper to me being like, this would be fun. Yeah. But then everyone is like, oh my gosh. Anyways. So there's some things that I think are worth mentioning about Dewey to kind of understand.
I think that's helpful to frame this next part, which is this educational philosophy. He was known as the father of functional psychology, which is basically this school of thought that emphasizes the purpose of behavior. It's this idea that behavior is adaptive and serves a purpose. And functional psychologists are kind of interested in understanding the functions of behaviors, like how it helps us survive and thrive in our environment. So anyway, he's the father of functional psychology, and he's obviously a major education reformer. He's a public intellectual. His background was shaped by his study of pragmatism, which is a philosophical movement that emphasizes the importance of experience and practical problem solving. You can kind of see this as a reaction to this notion that education is about something lofty or like disconnected from the man's day-to-day life. It's a pushback against that.
Well, especially because Dewey seemed very determined to make education accessible for all people, even when he knew not everyone would go to high school or college, which I think is interesting.
Yeah. So he's very focused on pragmatism, importance of active learning, experiential education. You were talking about this sounds a little bit like Montessori.
Yeah, I like that part.
He believed that education should be child-centered and that it should prepare students for active participation in a democratic society. In his writings, this is where he really got me, but he thinks that the day-to-day function of civil society, especially democracy and education, you can't separate those problems. And sort of one has to do with the other, and the state of one has to do with the state of the other. And if one is experiencing problems,
so is
the other probably is too. So if you have a dysfunctional democracy, you probably also have dysfunction in your education system, vice versa. He argued that students should learn by doing. They should be encouraged to ask questions and solve problems. He had this idea that kids are naturally curious, and if you just leave them alone and let them have fun, that they will learn, that kind of thought. He also believed that education should be relevant to students' lives. It should help them develop skills and knowledge. They need to be successful in life. And his philosophy has been criticized by some for being too focused on the present experience and for neglecting the importance of traditional academic subjects. But even though there's pushback there, his ideas have also been praised for their emphasis on creativity, problem solving, and social responsibility.
What a weird guy.
Yeah.
I think I'm pleasantly surprised.
You are?
I think so.
Are you going to go read
No.
any of his book? No? Oh, why not?
I read some of it. I read enough of it to
Yeah.
know.
I do remember being very, it was a slog to get through some of it, but it was very interesting stuff.
I don't think here's what I actually am mostly surprised by is that I think I agree with him more than I disagree with him, which I wasn't expecting.
Why weren't you expecting to agree with him? Just different time, different place, different sensibility kind of thing?
I think I've just, now that I've been in the classroom 10 years, I think I've got kind of a different grasp on it.
Yeah. He definitely informed my theoretical understandings of education.
I think something that strikes me about Dewey is that I don't think he went into it thinking he had every answer. And I like that. I like that he kind of went into it thinking, I want to make it better. And what that looks like could be a lot of things. Because in my experience of a lot of these people that I've read, it's a lot of like, do it exactly like this, and this will be successful, whatever. And I don't really get that vibe from Dewey.
Yeah, I think experimentation is definitely
and I think
part of his routine.
Yeah, and I think that's probably why I'm less offended by him than so many others, because
well, I think he also thinks that students should learn that way.
Yeah,
he also thinks that students should learn kind of by trial and error in some cases.
And I also don't think he went by way of this is the only way and it is my way and it is perfect. And he didn't have an inflated ego about it or something. And I think that's proof by how much everyone seemed to like him and be surprised by liking him because he didn't talk about himself. So I think I just kind of like that.
I hadn't really done any sort of deep dive on anything about his personal life before this. So there's certainly some interesting details there.
So that's Dewey.
It's good to finally
does Columbia have his desk somewhere that you can his office have a glass over it where you can see it? Is there a favorite window?
No. I mean, I'm sure they exist, but they don't. So
they just talked about him a lot.
Yes, there were a lot of conversations about John Dewey.
And you had professors that had Dewey or something? I mean, he died in the early 50s, so you'd think
there were certainly people there who were old enough to have been around
for the Dewey days.
But they were probably pretty young.
Super young then.
But yeah. I'm pretty sure that that anecdote about him staring out the window while lecturing was passed down through real people at Columbia. So that much, I think somebody was in proximity to him. But
I gotcha.
Yeah.
I think Dewey is fine. I don't think we should throw him off of the educational mountain or anything like that.
Well, nobody asked you to be against him. I don't think you have to be.
No, but you were
just
talking about how he's kind of a divisive or a debated
Yeah, like I said, it's just this kind of idea of what are the practical implications of these theoretical.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what people argue about in grad school too. They were like, this is nice, and yeah, education and democracy do seem to have something to do with each other, but what does that mean for me in my classroom when I have 25 screaming children and their parents are mad?
Let's talk about democracy.
There's always this tension, I think, between the theoretical lessons and the practicalities of the teaching profession. And that doesn't mean that what he says is not important. It means that you read it in order to give context to your day-to-day work, not to give you answers as to how to solve problems.
I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, it's not like a fact book of how to do teaching. It's like if you think that the purpose of education is to create free citizens in a democratic society, here's what you need to be thinking about as you go about your
promote
day-to-day.
that learning. Or yeah. Well, we did it. We covered Dewey.
We finally did.
He's off our list. Maybe we'll have to revisit Dewey.
Maybe we can do a deep cuts.
Maybe we'll go read a Dewey something. And
I definitely think at least one of these books would appeal to you.
I'm sure. Maybe I'm a Dewey fan and I just found out.
I think you might like it. I mean, maybe we should do a book club and you can decide.
Okay. That sounds great.
Ready to move on to our fill in the blank?
Goodbye, John Dewey. Yes.
I will do last show's question.
Okay, go for it.
We did an episode on the culinary arts, and we asked, in what year did Michelin publish its first American guide? And there was a hint about the answer in the episode because it was the first year that New York had published results in the Michelin guide, and that was 2005. And that's the first year for New York, also the first year for an American guide. 2005. It took that long to get us on the map. Anyway, okay.
Yeah, our food probably didn't really deserve it too much sooner. I'm going to jump back to Dewey for this question.
Okay.
And more naked people. One of Dewey's heroes was this famous American writer, the author of Leaves of Grass, and a man who enjoyed spending time with his friends while naked. Who is that famous writer?
Spending time with his friends while naked. It do be like that sometimes.
I want to know what these people were doing. Maybe we're too...
It's this connection to nature thing.
For him, for sure. But I just mean, like, I don't know. Okay. It was such a weird thing that kept coming up. I was like, why do I have to keep reading about John Dewey walking around naked?
Hey.
And then I had to read about this guy walking around naked. And I was like, why? Somebody. Okay. So, in news of not being naked, here's what I learned.
Okay, what did you learn this week? Yeah.
So Wimbledon just finished up recently, and this year was the first time in 146 years that women could wear a dark pair of shorts underneath their skirt or dress, which is to be all white.
Wow. It's so nice of them to be considerate 146 years later.
146 years for Wimbledon to decide that women could wear dark shorts under their all-white outfits. There have been tons of women athletes who have spoken out about it because some of them even go so far as to take birth control to make sure that they are not on their period during Wimbledon because of the all-white outfits. And Wimbledon has been fighting this because they thought that these dark shorts would be just awful somehow.
I really don't get it. It's just they're protecting their brand or whatever. They're like all white everything.
It's just the vibe of Wimbledon, yeah. So I included in the show notes an article from the BBC, but this is their quote of what the rules of Wimbledon are. So you must be dressed in suitable tennis attire that is almost entirely white and does not include off-white or cream. Trims in different colors are allowed on the necklines, cuffs, caps, headbands, bandanas, wristbands, socks, shorts, skirts, and undergarments. The code is clear that the trim should be no wider than a centimeter.
Okay.
And if there was any concern that players would start pattern clashing, the code decrees that the color contained within patterns will be measured as if it is a solid mass of color and should be within the 1 centimeter guide.
Oh my.
Plus, logos formed by variations of material or patterns are not acceptable. So, say Nike did something, and made up the swoosh out of a splotch of different colors or a different material or whatever the case, that would not be allowed.
Okay.
So, hasn't changed much other than the shorts under the skirt or the dress. So, women will still be playing in Wimbledon in all white, except where you may see dark shorts. And at this Wimbledon, I saw like dark green shorts and black shorts.
Huh.
One thing that I read is that it was a sign of the upper class to have all white clothing.
Oh my
And
goodness.
So that's part of what Wimbledon is coming from.
But
if you haven't-
out.
But if you haven't seen what spectators wear at Wimbledon, that's a whole entire other show. It's basically like the Kentucky Derby kind of dress.
Yeah.
Smaller hats.
Okay, so they're still snooty, but they are
Differently
accepting
snooty.
of periods now.
I wouldn't say they're accepting, but they'll just let you.
They're acknowledging
bleed.
of
They'll let you
periods
bleed
now.
a little differently.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but
they
I mean-
acknowledge the periods happen. now.
They do acknowledge the periods happen.
Good for them.
And I also just think all it would take is one person with a period to start a birth control because of Wimbledon that caused something awful to happen. Like, geez.
Yeah.
You would just think Wimbledon would feel bad, but I guess they really care about the all white on those green courts.
They seem to.
I also read about they cut that grass like every day that they play there.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets watered so as to stay firm. It was really interesting. Yeah, I read about the whole Wimbledon experience.
Wow.
But their shorts, also one last thing, sorry. The shorts have to be the length of their skirt or dress or shorter.
Okay.
Could not be like bike shorts longer or something like that. So they don't really want to see them until they're like in motion, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, that matters.
That's a very strict dress code.
It matters to Wimbledon. Okay, what'd you learn?
In the course of researching for this episode, what I learned about was called the University in Exile. I was researching the New School. University in Exile was founded in 1933 by the New School for Social Research in response to the growing threat of Nazism in Europe. It was a haven for scholars who'd been forced to flee their home countries, and it played a vital role in preserving and promoting academic freedom at the time. And then what I learned, I knew about that, but what I learned about was there's a new University in Exile consortium founded in 2018 by the New School. It's a network of universities and colleges that are committed to providing safe havens for endangered scholars. Both the University in Exile and the new University in Exile consortium protect academic freedom and ensure scholars can continue their work even in the face of persecution. Some universities and colleges that are members of the new University in Exile consortium include Columbia University, New York University, and the University of Chicago. And they've recently hosted scholars from both Ukraine and Afghanistan.
Wow.
Anyway, it's just interesting. I didn't know that it was sort of still active, but yeah, they founded the new version of it in 2018.
It's way more important than Wimbledon outfits.
Yeah. No.
Good for them.
They're both interesting, but yeah, I hadn't heard of it. Glad
Good
to see
for them, though. That's awesome.
The member entities will pledge to support at least one scholar in exile, basically.
Wow.
Interesting stuff.
That's really, really neat.
Okay. Anything else? Final thoughts for the week before we wrap up?
No, this was actually a really fun episode, and I'm glad we did some research on him. I have untarnished his name in my brain now. I think he might be worth revisiting for some of us.
Yeah, I do think that's interesting to go back and revisit the stuff that you learned when you were coming up. Once you have, about a decade of professional experience under your belt, it can really...
Reads differently.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes.
And because the whole time I was like, oh, I love Maria Montessori. I was like, well, why wouldn't I like Dewey? It's kind of the same vibe. Mm-hmm. Let him learn. Let him get in there and do it. And yeah.
All right. We'll talk to you all in 2 weeks.
We'll see you later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey listeners, thanks for supporting 16 to 1. We're your co-hosts. I'm Chelsea Adams.
And I'm Katie Day. Find our show notes, archives, and resources, sign up for our newsletter, or get in touch with us via the contact form at 16to1.com, all spelled out.
We are so grateful for our listener support. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the show and telling your friends or colleagues about it.
The show is edited and produced by you, Chelsea Adams, and you're also responsible for our show's music.
And you, Katie Day, serve as lead researcher and social media manager.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next show. Live long and prosper, y'all.
Y'all?
As Chelsea apparently speaks. I think that gave me the ick. I think that's my first ick for you.
Oh no.